Minecraft has a new wood type, Mangrove, added in 1.19. Learn everything you need to know about it in this ultimate guide. So how do you actually find the beautiful new mangrove swamp biome added in the wild update? Well, there's a couple ways, but I'm going to say it right out. It is a very rare biome, and I would say overall probably one of the rarest biomes in the game. And of course, the mangrove wood that everyone wants to get their hands on is also probably one of the rarest wood types that naturally generates. But once you get some of it, it's very easy to get more of it. So if you want to find it, the first thing you could do is go on Chunkbase and just manually type in that you want a mangrove swamp, and then go find it that way. But something you may want to know that'll help you find it a bit easier in survival is the way that the mangrove swamps generate. About 40-ish%, it depends, but around 40% of the swamp that would have generated in 1.18 now generates as a mangrove swamp. So let's say there was a seed where part of an area generated as a swamp. In 1.19, part of that swamp may generate as a mangrove swamp, or all of it may, about 40% of the time. And with swamp being somewhat rare in 1.18 already, in Minecraft 1.19, finding a mangrove swamp can be a little bit tricky. But just be aware that it generates in any biome that is not an ocean or a cold type biome, but it does tend to be in warmer biomes like deserts and jungles. I've especially found you find it a lot in the middle of big deserts, and so those could be good places to look to find it. Now, what is there actually to know about this mangrove swamp biome? Well, it generates with lots of mangrove trees. You can see the mangrove trees themselves have lots of roots beneath them. And also mostly there's just mud on the ground. Now this is of course a new item. You can see here that's the mud. And also there is grass patches occasionally. They sort of have differing grass colors just like the standard swamp does, so part of it's darker, some of it's lighter. And you'll also occasionally find some dead bushes here and there, like let's say this one over here, or maybe these dead bushes here. And on top of the mangrove trees are moss carpets, just to sort of give a more overgrown look to the mangrove swamp overall. Definitely a very dense feeling biome. It almost seems to me like what a jungle biome would be like in real life. Of course, the mangrove swamp in real life I'm sure is very much like this as well, but it does feel somewhat like a jungle. Now, as you may have noticed, we have white frogs that spawn in the mangrove swamp. Now, frogs do spawn two places in 1.19. They spawn in the standard swamp and the mangrove swamp. The frogs in the standard swamp are orange, but every frog you will find in the mangrove swamp is white. There's also beehives that occasionally generate on the mangrove trees, but that's not all there are for mobs that can generate in the mangrove swamp. Interestingly enough, if you look in some of the little lakes and pools around the mangrove swamp here, you may find some tropical fish like these ones over here, because tropical fish are able to spawn in the waters of the mangrove swamp, which definitely gives it a bit more atmosphere, and it seems to have a lot of differing colors of them. And finally, of course, we all know that the standard swamp has slimes at it, and the mangrove swamp can as well. But just for reference, the chance of a slime spawning in the mangrove swamp is about 50 times less than that of the standard swamp, and so it's incredibly rare to find a slime that is naturally generated in the mangrove swamp here, but if you do, it's definitely a lucky find. Now, of course, the mangrove swamp's most important part is the mangrove trees themselves, and you can see here that they do look very interesting and definitely make up the majority of this biome's generation. So basically, as we do see here, the mangrove trees generate with these massive roots sort of coming out of them, almost looks like a bit of a spider with some big legs. And also when the roots get near mud, sometimes they'll generate into the mud as a muddy mangrove root. Now, muddy mangrove roots aren't super useful of an item, they're basically just decorative. There's not really anything you can do with them, but they do generate beneath the mangrove trees when one of their roots goes into the mud here, and you can see they actually go incredibly deep here. That was 4 blocks deep of the muddy mangrove roots, and they share the same texture as basically the mud merged with the mangrove roots, as you would imagine. The mangrove trees also have a very large amount of leaves per tree. You will notice the mangrove trees here generate with a lot of leaves on them. For instance, this one tree here has a massive amount of leaves, and yet it may only have a couple mangrove logs on it. And that's actually a big feature of the mangrove trees, is that there's not very many mangrove logs on them. Now, of course, there's a decent amount, probably more than you'd find on your standard oak tree, but if you consider how many roots there are and how many leaves there are, it's not maybe as many as you'd think. But later on in this video, I'll definitely discuss a fast way of getting these logs. Also, when the tree first generates in, something interesting is that the propagules here generate on it. Now you probably wonder, what is a propagule, the sort of green thing coming out of the mangrove tree? Well, more or less that's the mangrove sapling. Now in real life, mangroves work this way too. but basically we have these propagules that generate on the tree, and you can plant them on several different blocks, things like dirt or like mud here. You can also plant them underwater, which is definitely not like any other sapling in the game. So you can see I just put an underwater sapling here, and this could even grow into a mangrove tree when it's underwater. And so basically whenever a mangrove tree generates in, either by bone mealing a propagule, because of course that is the sapling, or by just finding one that generated in the mangrove swamp, these propagules will naturally appear on the leaves already. And so you're probably wondering, if the propagules generate on the leaves already, well, do the leaves drop anything? And they definitely do not drop any propagules, no. So basically, if you're farming mangrove trees, I would suggest bringing some shears to break all these leaves. And I can see a lot of the players in the future, when they need to use leaves for something, using the mangrove leaves, as they don't technically have anything else you can do with them other than just decoration. Also, vines generate on all the mangrove trees, as well as I said earlier, these moss carpets, which definitely adds a bit of immersion into them. And also the moss and the vines here will generate on the mangrove trees if they are bone mealed as well, so you can even get some moss carpets that way if you want to. Also in the mangrove swamp you can definitely get lily pads to generate on water still. And oftentimes in the mangrove swamp you'll find little pools like this, or sort of canals full of water. But inside of the rest of the mangrove swamp there's definitely not as many small pools as you would generally get in a standard swamp. So we've collected some mangrove logs. Now what do the mangrove log items look like? Well, here's the mangrove planks right there, and we can also craft anything we want out of these. Of course, any recipe with wood can also work with the mangrove. There's a mangrove boat, there's of course mangrove slabs and mangrove stairs, but what's of particular interest is the mangrove doors, as well as the mangrove trapdoors. Now of course every door and trapdoor in Minecraft has a really unique look to it, and the mangrove is no exception. You'll notice here these two doors sort of have like a traditional Chinese look to them, really a very fancy and palace-like look in my opinion, and I quite like them. And the mangrove trapdoors are quite unique as well, because they have a circle in the middle of them, or sort of a Minecraft-like circle. And I also really like this texture because a lot of builds it's nice to have a bit of circular things in it, so those mangrove trapdoors work perfectly for that. And of course the mangrove boat looks about the same as any other boat, but something you may not have known is in 1.19, the ore on the boat texture there actually looks like mangrove, whereas before 1.19 it looked like the standard shovel texture. And of course the slabs as well as these stairs look about the same. And I definitely like this texture overall, sort of a reddish orange, certainly a color that's not in the game already. And also of course the stripped mangrove log has this red texture on the sides, definitely a very beautiful mangrove log. And the mangrove wood with the bark texture on every side looks interesting as well, especially since this bark texture was not based off of any of the previous Minecraft bark textures. It looks a little bit different than the others, as of course a lot of the textures of logs we currently have were based off of the old textures by Notch. This one was made completely uniquely, so it has quite an interesting look to it. Now something that was promised and added along with the mangrove frogs and swamp is the chest boat. Now this is something that was added in 1.19 along with the rest of this, and of course there's also a mangrove variety of this. Basically you can press E and look into the chest, sort of like you would with a donkey, and it takes up the back slot of your boat here. Now if you break the boat with a chest in it, it'll actually break as a chest boat. It does not break as a chest and a boat separately. And when you're in here, this can actually be a really viable option to explore around the mangrove swamp. Something that was actually shown at Minecon was the player rowing through the mangrove swamp here with the chest boat. If you want to access your inventory here, you can as well, but if you want to put on some armor or something, you'll have to get out of the boat. Also, if you shift or crouch and right click or select the chest right here, you can take a look at it without being inside the boat if you want to. And there's no hitbox for the chest on the boat there, so my feet can actually go right through it like you see here. But overall, a super useful item for navigating around the mangrove swamp as well, and something that was added along with everything else. And these do of course come in every single wood color that's in the game. So now that we know all about mangrove wood, time for the big question: how do we farm this? Because as you can see, there just is not a large amount of logs per mangrove tree, and they can be hard to get to. As well as that, with the extreme rarity of the mangrove swamp biome, it is very unlikely that this biome will generate next to your house, and so because of that, you'll probably be bringing back some supplies to farm these with. And here's what you want to do. Basically, if you bone meal the bottom of a mangrove leaf, a little bud of a propagule will spawn in. Now if we mangrove that once more, we'll go to stage 1, 2, 3, 4. Now once it's at stage 4 we can break it and we can have this propagule or sapling. This actually technically makes this the easiest sapling in all of Minecraft to get, as you can't directly farm the other saplings in quite so easy of a way. But something you can do as well if you want to save on bone meal is once the bottom of the leaves here have been bone mealed and we have the propagule buds there, those will start growing into the full grown propagules by themselves. You don't have to bone meal it any further. And so just with bone mealing a couple of these here, with just one bone meal, these can eventually grow into these full grown propagules. What I think could be really cool is having all these leaves here with all these propagules. You could sort of have like a mangrove propagule farm. And as you can see already, some of these buds have already gone to stage 1 or even stage 2. They do grow incredibly quickly, and so there really isn't much of a need to bone meal spam these, but you can if you want. So anyway, the first thing you're going to want to do when you come to the mangrove swamp here is to try and take one of these leaves with you. But if let's say you don't have silk touch or shears, at very least try and get a singular propagule, and with this one propagule you should be able to get a massive supply of these by just bone mealing the leaves. So once you've got your sampling of mangrove, here's how you can farm it past just letting it grow and breaking the logs. So first of all, something you may find interesting is you can actually use bone meal to grow those propagules. If you have a dispenser facing into the top of the mangrove leaves, that will make one of these little buds spawn in. If we right click on this, it won't grow any more of the buds there. However, if we right click on a dispenser here that is facing the bud when it comes out, so just one block over and below the leaf right here, then this can bone meal that and make it gain 1 stage per bone meal. So then you could basically use a piston, some hoppers, and these dispensers here to make an automatic propagule farm if you wanted to, but there's not a massive purpose for that because of course you can get these so easily. And also of course if you break a not fully grown propagule, it'll just give you nothing. Alright, so we've now collected a fair amount of the propagules. What you're going to want to do is place just one down and bone meal it till it grows. Of course you can always let these grow naturally as well, but I would generally suggest doing that. Now stand where it was, look up and see that there's that log above you, and go just one to the side and place down another mangrove propagule and bone meal that. Then go one over to the side here again. Doesn't really matter if there's blocks above it. Just place this down so we have 1, 2, and then this one here as the third. Bone meal that. Then go to the fourth one, place it down and bone meal that, till we basically have 5 of these that have been bone mealed in a row. Once you've done that, go back to the start here, place down another propagule and bone meal that, so we have a 5x5 space of 25 of the propagules. And something you may find really interesting here with the propagules is that unlike literally every single other sapling in the entire game, when we bone meal this propagule here, usually blocks don't actually spawn where it was. You see here the roots of the mangrove go around where the propagule was, but there's generally not a root where the mangrove propagule actually was, and so it's interesting because you get this sort of strange effect of the propagule disappearing and nothing coming out of it. Also, something really good that you should know is if you're bone mealing a bunch of these propagules to grow, the mangrove roots can unfortunately generate right through a propagule, and so oftentimes when you're doing this, you could have those mangrove roots delete some of your propagules like they just actually did right here, and so you want to be careful of that. And you can even see here those propagules disappeared, and that's how I'd generally recommend putting down one propagule at a time and then bone mealing it. One good thing about this though is sometimes you will bone meal it and a block will appear where you were, but you cannot suffocate in the mangrove roots. Although you unfortunately cannot walk into them, you can't suffocate in them either. So now that you've bone mealed approximately 25 propagules in a 5x5 shape into a massive mangrove tree, which by the way is perfect for an automatic base if you want to, what I would then suggest doing is going to the center of it, so basically going a little bit higher up so you get past the root level, and you should find a massive core full of just the mangrove logs here. And so this is the trick to quickly and efficiently get lots of these. This basically makes this item go from sort of rare and hard to get without just destroying the entire mangrove biome into something that's really easy to get, because basically the way that this generates, a log will override any other block that generates in, so it'll override a root, it'll override a leaf, things like that. Not always, but generally it will, and so because of that, you can get tons of these logs here because they will have the priority when generating. And as you can see here, I'm getting close to an entire stack of the mangrove logs, and I've barely even touched how many I've generated in here. And of course, once every log has been harvested, you don't even have to wait for the leaves to despawn, because when they do despawn, they won't drop anything of value, and because of that, it makes it incredibly efficient. But something you may want to do is break all the propagules off the side of the tree before you do this, unless you just want to make a propagule farm by laying out a bunch of the leaves and bone mealing them. I know I definitely use this technique to harvest lots of the mangrove wood, just as it's so efficient, and afterwards you even have sort of like a treehouse that's built here, but you can always get rid of it as well. Anyway, that is the ultimate guide to mangrove. Happy building with this new wood type, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!